Well, the Fed is obviously independent. It's supposed to be independent, but independence in Trump's head does not exist. He does not understand why a federal government must be independent from himself. He believes that his power and the executive branch's power should dictate what happens with the Fed and with the Department of Justice and with our military, with all of the various things that should be independent. The reality is, as you talk about, Trump being spooked, it's a little late for Trump to be spooked at this point. We've been talking about tariffs. He has been talking about this for quite some time. The markets are in disarray. We're heading toward a recession. Everybody is saying that this is a terrible thing. And yet for just now, all of a sudden he woke up and he realized, this is a terrible thing for our economy and our country.
I just have to respond to your assertion that the federal government should operate independently of the elected president of the United States. You mentioned the Fed,
and the Department of Justice.
You said DOJ, which is obviously appointed and works for the president.
No, but it's independent. Your laws should not be enforced based on the president. They should be enforced based on the law.
You said the military. Obviously, he's the commander in chief of the military. I'm just trying to figure out what percentage or part of the government that you think should run away from the president.
There are institutions that are independent.
I'm going to step in here because I don't want us to change the subject, okay? We are talking about the independence of the Fed. Do you agree or disagree that the Fed should be independent?
I think the president should be able to render an opinion about
that is a
monetary
yes
policy.
Or no.
Whether he should be able to fire him is an
open
question.
That is a yes or no question. But should the Fed be independent of the whims of any president of the United States?
I think the president ought to be able to have opinions.
Why can't you say yes or no?
Previous presidents.
I think it's an open question where they should be able to fire the head of the Fed. Some Republican senators don't agree.
So, Scott.
But I don't.
Right.
I just think the idea that the president should not have any opinion about monetary policy is crazy.
I'm going to give you a third try on this one. Should the Fed's decisions about how they operate, the interest rates, when they raise or lower them, should they be independent of the president of the United States?
Does independent mean they don't take his opinion into consideration?
Independent means no, they don't take his opinion into consideration.
I don't agree with that. I'm sorry. I think the president.
Okay.
I think the president should be able to render an opinion.
I'm going to ask Charlotte, what do you this was taken in by the markets, that idea, right, this week. What was the reaction among people who are making money, they have businesses, they are operating in the financial world to this idea that people like Scott believe that the Fed should be listening to the president and act accordingly?
That's not what I said. You put words in my mouth. I said, should he be able to render an opinion, and should the Fed take that into consideration?
No.
I think he should be able to have an opinion.
I didn't say anything.
And they should take that into consideration. It shouldn't be the only thing.
I didn't
but
say
he should
anything.
have an opinion.
The president can have whatever opinions he wants. Yeah. What I'm asking is whether the Fed should be independent in their decision-making from those opinions.
I said, does that mean they can take his opinion into consideration? And I think they should take the president's opinion into consideration. That's not the only thing. That's
let me see if Charlotte has some thoughts on this.
I think it's very clear from the market's response that not just the desired outcome, the fundamental law of nature needs to be that the Federal Reserve, the chair of the Federal Reserve, makes decisions on monetary policy that are based on economic data, not on the whims of a president. And that's very, very clear. And I think, the job of the Fed is complex, particularly in the environment in which Trump has placed Jerome Powell, where you have a threat of slowing growth and increasing inflation due to these tariffs, right? So you have a stagflationary environment that's very hard for the Fed to manage. It is true that some investors probably, if Jerome Powell were to lower interest rates, I'm not going to predict how the market would respond. However, it's very, very clear that the market responds extremely negatively to even a hint that the president might intervene.
There's a direct
intervening and rendering an opinion are two different things.
There's a direct effect here with the American worker that has to do with China and with the stock market that people are seeing every day. Donald Trump ran on being tough on China, and workers and folks in America, they love that talk. They love being tough on China, but they also love getting really cheap stuff from Walmart, and they can't have both at the same time. And I think that's why you see him backing off of that. With the stock market, regular folks folks don't understand Dows and bonds and all that, but they understand their 401k. And I think that's where the pressure's coming from, is people around there saying, you're hurting your own people. And so you see people backing down.
I think there is an argument.
Do you honestly believe the president shouldn't be able to render opinions about monetary policy?
You keep repeating something that nobody ever said. No one ever said that Trump cannot have
We're having original thoughts here.
No, Scott. No one ever said that Trump can't have an opinion. The question is, should the Fed act based on that opinion? And I think it's just common sense, right? The Fed, it should be acting based on economic information and data, not anybody's opinion. Trump is not an economist, and as far as I can tell, does not even have a good grasp on how trade works, which is really problematic if he's going to then turn around and start telling the Fed how to do its job.
We don't want Donald Trump to have influence over the operation of the government.
We
I just think it's wrong.
We don't want to have Donald Trump have influence over monetary policy. That is how it has worked. That is where the confidence in this system of economics comes from.